It's so easy to be average. It takes a little something to be special, Don. It takes a little something special to be a great player. Did you push yourself to be great today?
There wasn't a first down. Not that much. The officiating, I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today. That spot, the graphic displays the unfair penalties. The one not called on us, I think clearly was being pushed to the ball back there. And the previous penalty they called on Delano Hill, the ball's uncatchable and by the receiver. See, I'm bitterly disappointed. At least throw a hat, when you stick, when you're silent, that's a penalty.
This is the Silver Bullets Podcast on the Ozone Radio Network, your authority on all things Ohio State. Here are your hosts, Shannon, Sommers, and Chip Minnich.
Not Chip, if you have an iota of human feeling.
Buckeye Nation, welcome to another edition of the Silver Bullets Podcast on the Ozone Radio Network. I'm Shannon Sommers. Today we're going to be talking about the Ohio State football and recapping the spring game. And I have with me Chip Minnich. Chip, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Shannon. Great to be with you.
All right, like I said, some of the things we're going to discuss is just basically, get into the process of the offseason and recap the spring practices and game and whatnot. Were you able to make it up to the game on Saturday?
Yes, I was. I was able to take my twin 14-year-old sons and my wife's cousin, who is a big-time Ohio State fan but has never been to a spring game. He also accompanied us. So we were sitting in the end zone, underneath, I guess you would say, of the larger, like the open end zone, so to speak. So it was a great time. Compliments to Ohio State for their planning of the spring game. You and I were messaging back and forth, when, in terms of like trying to get this all understood and figured out. I was thinking, okay, well, why don't they just, move it to Friday night and everything? And long story short, the only thing they could have possibly done better is if they had moved it up to 11 a.m. instead of 11:45 a.m., we probably would have got out of the game without getting any rain on us. So by the time we walked back to our car where we were tailgating, we got wet, but we weren't soaked. So it was a great time.
Well, I ended up having really good karma because I had a situation I had to deal with after the game. And so when I left, I got to walk to my vehicle and I was bone dry. So I can't complain on that end.
Well, good for you.
But yeah, I agree. I think Ohio State ended up handling everything perfectly. Everything went according to plan. A lot of people showed up. Not everybody who bought tickets ended up showing up because of the time change, I guess. But still, you had almost 80,000 fans there. I mean, when I walked outside the gates in order to go to the North Rotunda there was a huge line already at like 9 o'clock, and the gates didn't open up till 10. So, I mean, the Ohio State faithful, they came out, and it was good to see Buckeye Nation come out and support the Buckeyes. And yeah, it's just a spring game, but it's still a chance for fans to get up and close and enjoy watching the team. And even if it's just a glorified practice, it's still it's nice to be able to be there in the shoe and be a part of, the whole Buckeye Nation thing if you want.
Yeah, I agree. My wife is an accountant, so with tax season, she was not able to join us, and my daughter was taking the ACT exam at that point, and it'd be fair to say that both my wife and daughter were understandably disappointed that they weren't able to join us for the spring game because they're not nearly the football fan that I am, but there's something just about the entire atmosphere, about the idea of going down, tailgating, Now I understand, the way that, as I said, Ohio State, they were smart. They didn't have the marching band at the traditional halftime, but just the entire thing, it's something that has kind of become kind of like a little family tradition, that my wife and children, I guess you could say that they abide or oblige me in, but it's nice that my wife and daughter were a little disappointed that they couldn't join my sons and I.
Yeah, I bet. This is my second year working it, so even though I was there, I didn't get to watch the game in person, but hey, while you're sitting there watching the game, or if you watch again later, I mean, what are some of the things that caught your eye from the spring game?
Compliments to you and Tom and Tony Gerdeman listening to the last episode of Across the Field, because I thought you all articulated a lot of the high points in terms of, we were talking about a number of different players. The one guy, maybe I'm mistaken, so correct me if I am. The one player that I would like to bring up that I don't believe that none of you mentioned on the last episode of Across the Field. One player who caught my eye just because he seemed to be flying from sideline to sideline was Pete Werner. And I have no idea if Pete Werner's in line to win one of the starting jobs. I don't recall, him being mentioned in that capacity, but I certainly think he's going to play a more active role on the Ohio State defense this year, certainly on special teams like he did last year as a true freshman. Offensively, I agree with, I can't imagine that he's going to have a huge role just because of the number of talented players at the running back position. But I agreed with Gerd, talking about Master Teague. I thought he looked very impressive. My wife's cousin John, who, as I said a moment ago, it was his first spring game, so I was trying to explain to him, some of these guys are early enrollees, and John, and at one point said, so that kid was playing high school football last October. Just kind of, he was just impressed with, just and as you guys said on your podcast, sometimes it gets frustrating watching the two-hand touch, but when it turned into tackle, Master Teague definitely showed, a physical level of play that I think will suit him well in future seasons. Yeah,
he definitely looks the part going forward in the future. And I mean, you have Antonio Williams in front of him, Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins. I mean, it's nice to be able to have that stable and just, keep churning out 1,000-yard rushers, hopefully. So he's definitely looking the part, and can't wait to really see him and getting more carries in the games. So one of the biggest things, first let's circle back to the linebackers. You mentioned Pete Werner. Now, I believe that he is trying to get a starting job. I don't think they have anybody penciled in except for, I guess, Tuff Borland was penciled in for the Mike linebacker. And now with him being hurt, you have Justin Hilliard and Baron Browning going at it for that spot. And then you also had you had the Sam in the weak side, or the Sam and, I can't even think right now. But Werner is definitely one of the ones that are in the rotation. And I believe Bill Davis said that they haven't figured out or settled on a rotation yet. So, he definitely was moving around the field quite a bit. He's got some nice speed. He's able to go sideline to sideline and cover a lot of ground. I'm really looking forward to this linebacker core getting into, the first couple of games are going to have some issues, granted, because they're young, haven't played together, and there's going to be some miscommunication probably. But as the season goes on, I think that this linebacker core is going to have a shot to be making some noise to be one of the best in the country.
I agree with you. I think the talent's there. I wrote something similar for the ozone.net, but the talent's there. It's just they're just inexperienced. There's going to be growing pains, as you just said, but the talent, you're talking, Pete Werner was one of those, going back to him, he was one of those players that was originally verbally committed to Notre Dame. He flipped late in the process. And I think the fact that, Baron Browning came in the same recruiting class, was so highly touted, a 5-star linebacker, that I think a lot of people just kind of forget that Pete Werner was highly recruited too. Now, he wasn't as highly acclaimed as Baron Browning, but as I said, he I thought was very impressive just with his effort, his speed. And as Urban Meyer has said, if people make mistakes, that's not necessarily a bad, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Those can be corrected. But the fact, like what they're looking for is that effort, the competitiveness. And I think Pete Werner definitely showed that not only in the spring game, but obviously throughout the spring practices that preceded it.
Now let's stick with the defense for a second. And we, losing Denzel Ward into, the draft, you have Kendall Sheffield, you have Damon Arnett. Is it Damon Arnett?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you got it.
And then you have Jeffrey Okudah, who he's been hurt. But then you had Shaun Wade, who he was looking like the real deal. And he looks to be jumping into making a possible 4-man rotation for the cornerbacks. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I thought, I can't remember, I believe it was Gerd who said he kind of almost was like a water snake in terms of on the last episode of Across the Field. I thought it was a very appropriate analogy. Just, he was very smooth. He was very, in terms of his coverage, he was very thorough in terms, he was covering receivers like a glove. Marcus Williamson also is now he had his moments where sometimes he was victimized, but I think he's another guy that, will probably be in there. So getting back to the idea of a 4-man rotation, I certainly believe that will be the case. With the prevalence of so many spread teams, with you're talking, 3, 4 or 5 wide receivers, so it kind of forces opposing defenses to counter with, predominantly nickel and dime coverage packages. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that Shaun Wade, if he's not a starter, that he's going to be in the rotation and certainly going to be contributing a lot. And, Kendall Sheffield, I think you said that, watching it on replay, I believe it might have been James Laurinaitis saying, they're expecting a lot of big things from Kendall Sheffield this coming. They being the Ohio State coaching staff are expecting a lot of big things from Kendall Sheffield. Damon Arnett seemed to kind of turn it on from mid-season to the end of last season, and Jeffrey Okudah showed a lot of promise in the Cotton Bowl. But Shaun Wade on Saturday in the spring game was certainly showing why he was such a highly coveted recruit.
And another name that Buckeye fans should learn to, that's going to be part of that rotation, possibly, especially towards the end of the season, if there's any, like little nagging injuries or anything like that, is Sevyn Banks. I mean, they were picking on him, but he definitely, he can stick with the guys stride, the wide receivers stride for stride. And that's definitely going to be needed, especially when the last game you're going to be going against, receivers like Tariq Black and Donovan People-Jones over there at Michigan.
Yeah, I think Sevyn Banks, I think Tyreek Johnson, now granted, they, as you said, Sevyn Banks, he was called for a pass interference game or penalty in the spring game, and they were picking on him, so to speak. But I certainly agree with you that those kind of players, they're going to have ample opportunity to work their way into the rotation and up the depth chart, if not necessarily at the beginning of the season, but by the end of the season. And I think you would agree that the fastest and best way to make a strong impression on Urban Meyer is to be a contributor on special teams. And that'll probably be where both Sevyn Banks and Tyreek Johnson will make their first mark.
Now let's flip it over to the offensive side. I mean, there's no sense dwelling on the defensive line because you've Chase Young. He definitely looks the part, and you got Nick Bosa naturally, who Defensive Player of the Year, who's going to be making a lot of noise, and you have Draymond Jones, who you got those three on the field at the same time, and those guys are going to be creating a lot of havoc for the offensive lines of the Big Ten, and whatnot. But jumping over to the offensive side, one of the areas that I am most concerned with, and it really started, I mean, I was concerned before, but alarm bells started going off watching the game, was that everybody's been penciling in Isaiah Prince over there at left tackle, but they were moving him and Malcolm Pridgeon, was it? No, it's Thayer Mumford. They're moving him and Thayer Mumford back and forth from right to left tackle. And it seems like Prince isn't taking that step in order to be the starting left tackle. I mean, what are your thoughts on that battle going on for left tackle, and how concerning is it, especially with not having a true and tried and an experienced center on the line also?
No, I'm glad that you are of the same mindset that I am. For the ozone, I had written about positions of concern leading up to the spring game, and the offensive line was my number one concern. And the spring game, after seeing Ohio State, now granted, it's a spring game, you can't really put too much stock into it. But yeah, after seeing Thayer Mumford at left tackle, after being led to believe that Isaiah Prince was going to be the left tackle, it just has me concerned, because offensive line is definitely a position of repetition and cohesiveness and chemistry with the players that you're lining up with. Now, I will give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt that Michael Jordan, who is the starting left guard, he was withheld all spring because he was recovering from his shoulder surgery. Brandon Bowen is still recovering from the broken leg. He's out. Demetrius Knox, who came in for Brandon Bowen midseason at right guard, he was there. As you just said, the center position is still kind of in flux. That Brady Taylor's the presumed starter, but it's entirely possible, that by the end of fall camp, who's to say that Brady Taylor's still going to have a hold on it? But getting back to your question, Thayer Mumford, I think he shows a lot of promise, but he is relatively inexperienced, and the left tackle, especially with the quarterback position still kind of up in the air, I think, you want that blindside protection for your quarterbacks to be as sturdy and stable as possible. With Isaiah Prince, granted, he'd never played left tackle, but he was arguably one of the most experienced players on the offensive line. So that's why it just seemed very, very surprising to hear Coach Dudrawa talk about the fact that they're interchangeable. Well, something had to go wrong, because at the beginning of the spring, Coach Meyer talked about how Isaiah Prince earned the right to play left tackle. So you can try to, I guess you could say, try to brighten this up whatever manner or fashion you want. But either Isaiah Prince wasn't doing a good job at left tackle, or, there's, maybe some more concerns about, I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly pessimistic, but it just seemed to me that you would think that a player of Isaiah Prince's caliber, that you would want Prince at left tackle to help solidify the line. And it seems that leaving spring, that there is not the solid offensive line that I think most fans were expecting.
Now, Mathew Burrell, just this week, he goes out on Twitter and announces he's going to be transferring, which will bring Ohio State down to 87. So we're just going to be sitting here waiting for the next two, whoever they are, to going to be transferring. But having him not being a part of the offensive line, how much do you think that, is this going to be something that's going to impact the Buckeyes, or not really?
No, it's first of all, I wish Mathew Burrell the best of luck wherever he winds up. He was player. I was talking about this with somebody earlier today. When you think back to it, he was highly recruited. He came in 2015, and I'll talk about that in greater detail. But he came in 2015, and when I think back on his career at Ohio State, he would play and he would be a contributor, but he never ever seemed to be able to grab hold of starting opportunities when they presented themselves. And what I mean by that is, for example, we were talking about last year with, when Bowen was knocked out, broke his leg, he was out. And I remember the week, I believe during the game, the Maryland game, when Bowen was knocked out of the game, Burrell came in and was the replacement. So there was a lot of, maybe I'm mistaken, but that there seemed to be a lot of speculation that Burrell was going to get the starting right guard spot. And the next thing you know, it was Demetrius Knox. Okay, fine. So maybe, Knox was better at guard. Well, then with Billy Price, his departure to the NFL this spring, this offseason, the center position was up for battle. So it was kind of, okay, well, Brady Taylor was the front runner, but Mathew Burrell is going to be in the running for that. And the next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, actually it's Brady Taylor, but he's going against Josh Myers and Matthew Jones. And it just seemed as though that Mathew Burrell never, ever really was able to grab hold of a starting opportunity when they were presented, or to force his way into the consideration. So I mentioned a moment ago how Mathew Burrell was part of the 2015 recruiting class. In preparation for this, just kind of looking back on some of the players that Ohio State signed in 2015. They signed 27 players on National Signing Day, in February 2015. Now, a number of those players were on the offensive line, such as Grant Schmidt, Kevin Fetter. We just talked about Mathew Burrell, Brandon Bowen. They signed Isaiah Prince, and they also on signing day they had a player by the name of Mirko Jurkovic, who was not academically qualified for Ohio State. He wound up at Georgia. So my point being is, out of 6 offensive linemen that Ohio State signed in 2015, only 2 of them remain, Brandon Bowen and Isaiah Prince. So I think back to, I don't know if you recall, but Urban Meyer in the past has often kind of had scathing, backhanded comments about 2015 recruiting class. Now I'm kind of getting an understanding as to why he sometimes makes those comments.
Yeah, that class turned out not to be so great for Ohio State, but you got to learn your lesson and move on, I guess. But now, sticking with the offensive line and going back with the defensive line, he had 15 practices for the spring. We're going to be, when we go into the fall camp, which starts right after the Big Ten Media Days, I think it's like the second to last week in July.
Yeah, it's like July 23rd and 24th in Chicago.
I just remember it's around my birthday, so it's all good.
Are you going? Are you going to Chicago?
No, it's your birthday then too, isn't it?
My birthday is July 20th. So, yeah, so the weekend before.
Yeah, yours is the 20th and mine's is the 21st, yeah. I mean, I would love to go to Chicago, but and that's something for a later time. But the Buckeyes are going to be having a lot more practices against each other than the 15 that they had in the spring. So you're going to be having these offensive linemen going against the Nick Bosa, the Chase Young, the Justin Hilliard, not Hilliard as a defensive line, but Cooper, Draymond Jones and all these guys. Do you think that is going to be a huge advantage for Ohio State before they go and play Oregon State and TCU?
I do. You're not going to find too many defensive end combinations. I venture to say Clemson is well respected on a national level, but you aren't going to find too many defensive lines across the country that have the same kind of talent that Ohio State does. With Nick Bosa is already penciled in as a first-round draft choice in 2019. You just mentioned Draymond Jones. He could have been selected in the NFL draft that's coming up next week. Chase Young is going to, get an opportunity to play much more than he did last year as a true freshman, and he was an impact player as a freshman. Jonathan Cooper, Jay-Sean Cornell, who was highly recruited. I mean, you could keep going on and on and on. So I think it's going to be a baptism by fire for the offensive line, but it's also the kind of thing where I believe that Greg Studara, as an offensive line coach, has demonstrated an ability to develop the offensive line talent. And what will be crucial is making sure that if Thayer Munford does emerge as the starting left tackle, he's leaving spring football as the starting left tackle, based on a tweet that was sent out by the Ozone yesterday. If he remains the starting left tackle coming out of fall camp, I have every confidence that the defensive line certainly taught Thayer Munford a thing or two heading into the first game against Oregon State on September 1st.
All right, now moving on from the offensive line, the wide receivers are pretty much set. Then you got the H-backs, which McCall, that kid as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be something very special and very fun to be watching in a Buckeyes uniform. He had, I believe he's a true freshman, is he, or is he a redshirt freshman? Jalen Harris, the 6'5" kid. That kid he is going to be something special to watch on Saturdays. But I think he might just get lost in the rotation because you have, Alex Mack and Ben Victor, who actually he played really good on Saturday. So you had those guys in front of him. I mean, what are your takeaways from the wide receiver core?
You mean Austin Mack, though, right? I know the NFL draft's coming up and everything. It's very easy to think of old Cleveland Browns players. So Austin Mack, right?
I don't know why I said that. I don't. That's just a bad habit, apparently.
Okay. That's all right. So I just want to make sure we're talking about the same guy. But I think Jalen Harris definitely, he had been whispered and rumored about in terms of being a guy that looked to be taking a step forward. I'm not sure if he's a redshirt freshman or not, because he played sparingly last year. I don't know if they redshirted him. But the point being that I think when I look at those wide receivers, you have, in terms of just the body type, you have Harris and Ben Victor are similar in the sense of, okay, they're really big, rangy. You could throw it up high in the end zone, loft it up in the end zone. They're going to be able to out jump, probably out maneuver and out position a defensive back. At worst, probably draw a pass interference, penalty, because wide receiver is going to, probably try to mug them in the end zone to keep them from catching the ball. I think Austin Mack is definitely going to emerge as a bigger wide receiver. Paris Campbell looked great. Didn't see, in terms of like with, Johnny Dixon and Terry McLaurin and as much as we will in the fall. And, let's say that, like there's wide receiver talent coming in. But I agree. I don't think there's any real need to rush players onto the field, have them burn up eligibility, with the talent that's there. I definitely believe, the Ohio State wide receivers are certainly going to be emerging. Without you mentioned Demario McCall, I think H-back, he certainly showed that is the ideal position for him. Kind of makes me wonder if the coaching staff is going to possibly move KJ Hill from H-back to wide receiver, being an outside wide receiver instead, because between Paris Campbell and Demario McCall, I think they fit the H-back role a little better, but it remains to be seen what the coaching staff does with that wide receiver group.
Yeah, I think in the red zone, if you had Harris and Victor, having one of those guys on each side, unless you have some twin towers for defensive backs, and you're going to have to bring some safeties over to help cover those guys, which should be able to open up the middle of the field for the Buckeyes, which, you got Dobbins and Weber back there being able to get into the end zone or something for, McCall or Campbell or whatnot. So I think there's going to be a lot of fluidity and a lot of fun to watch these guys in the red zone. The question is, the biggest question that everybody is wanting to know is who's going to be the starter. So, first of all, what are your thoughts as far as watching from the spring game? Did that one person came out higher than the other, or, I mean, what are your thoughts?
I thought they both were impressive in different ways, and I agreed with what you guys were saying on Acosta Field. I keep going back to that, but just to kind of, I think it would be giving a disservice to others, that listen to this podcast, as they didn't hear some of the fine thoughts that you and Tom and Gerd had. Getting back to your question, I agree with the sentiment that Joe Burrow is, I believe that the phrase or the term that was used is the safer choice. And he seems, in my opinion, he seems to be a continuation of Urban Meyer's offensive philosophy that Ohio State fans have come to expect since he's been at Ohio State. I certainly recognize the talent and the arm strength that Dwayne Haskins possesses. If I have a concern about Dwayne Haskins being named the starter, is that I think back to, there are certain years when Urban Meyer, before at Florida, I'm thinking of, where he did not have a quarterback with mobility, and how that, and Ohio State fans can kind of think back to, I realize, 2015 is not that far in the rear view mirror, but I just think the offense, without having a viable threat for that zone read, that zone read play that Urban Meyer loves, I think the offense takes, it's not that it's a horrible offense, but it just takes an element of the offense away that Urban Meyer has truly come to expect and is very passionate about.
Yeah, I think I stated that I think that you can't go wrong with picking either quarterback to lead your team. I think that, like Tom was saying on the Acosta Field, that Burrow is the safe pick, and Haskins would be, he can get you undefeated in a national championship, or you can go, say, 9-3. With Burrow, you're probably going to be possibly maybe only losing one game, maybe possibly going for the national championship. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that Burrow is going to be the starter just based on the videos that Ohio State's put out, and you watch in the background that he's that up in your face, that leader, that the halftime speech, getting the guys pumped up, what JT Barrett did. I think he's taken that and embraced it, whereas that's not who Haskins is, and that's not a slight towards him. That's just Haskins has a different type of leadership. Now, does the team go with the old style, get up in your face leadership with the, old JT way, or do they go with the new way? It's going to be interesting to see. But all right, let's say that Haskins or Burrow is named the starter. Now, what kind of impact is this, do you think, going to have for Ohio State long term, like for next year and the year after? Because you have Tate Martell, who he's got the skills of like a Braxton Miller. He needs to work on his throwing mechanics some, and he looks to be able to really fight harder next year. I mean, this year he was there, but just slightly behind. So that's why everybody's pretty much put it in a 2-man race between Haskins and Burrow. But I mean, what are your thoughts as far as the impact in the future long-term for Ohio State?
Well, I definitely agree. I think Tate Martell has a role at Ohio State. We had talked about it before, and I know the idea of having a special package for Tate Martell, especially if Dwayne Haskins is named the starter, it certainly seems viable. I think that Tate Martell, he's only 5'11", but he showed, especially with as the game progressed, that he needs work on the passing game, but his skills in terms of running the zone read, as I was just mentioning a moment ago, that is the strength of his game. And I stand by the fact that Urban Meyer loves that aspect of the offense. So I definitely think Tate Martell has a role. I just don't know how large of a role if Joe Burrow winds up winning the job, because Joe Burrow is kind of he has a stronger arm than JT Barrett, but not nearly as strong as Dwayne Haskins. And he's mobile like JT Barrett, but he's not nearly as mobile as Tate Martell. So he's just he has a skill set that fits perfectly in between, like both Haskins and Martell. And I agree with you. I think he definitely has that leadership quality. So remains to be seen if Burrow's going to win the job, if Haskins is going to win the job. I just think back to when Joe Burrow verbally committed to Ohio State, that at the time Tom Herman was the assistant who offered Burrow the scholarship, and he told Urban Meyer, "I found your quarterback. I found you." And Alex Smith, who played for Urban Meyer at Utah, back in 2004 and led Utah to a 12-0 record. And I believe Tate Martell has a definite role on this team. I agree with the coaches when they say that, or the speculation that there's going to be design packages. Tate Martell's role running the zone read, I thought that was evidenced on Saturday during the spring game. Definitely has the ability to make things happen with the zone read. I believe that Joe Burrow can do everything that Urban Meyer has come to expect within the offense. I'm skeptical about Dwayne Haskins being able to run the zone read if convincingly. I'm not saying that he won't do it, but I'm just saying convincingly, and have the defense actually believe Dwayne Haskins is going to keep the ball. I think back to when Urban Meyer was at Florida, before Tim Tebow arrived on the scene. Chris Leak at Florida in 2005. Chris Leak led Florida to a 9-3 record. That was Urban Meyer's first year at Florida. He had a good season, throwing the ball, but he was not a threat carrying the ball. And if I'm even more concerned is in 2010, after Tim Tebow left, a player by the name of John Brantley became the quarterback, and Florida kind of struggled to an 8-5 record. And, John Brantley was highly recruited, but he was just not nearly the threat of running the ball like Urban Meyer likes his quarterbacks to do. So nothing against Dwayne Haskins. I think that the talent is there. I just think when I look at Joe Burrow, I see that he checks off more of the boxes of what Urban Meyer expects from his quarterback, especially when it comes to the mobility factor, than Dwayne Haskins does.
Now, if Burrow is named a starter after this season, Burrow would probably be gone then you would have the battle between Haskins and Martell. Do you think that either one of those two will stay trying to battle again for the following year? And if Haskins wins that year, I mean, I know we're looking ahead, but would Tate Martell be fine, sitting another year on the bench behind? I mean, he'll have plays, obviously, but you know what I'm saying?
That's a good question, because I think I could see, if Joe Burrow is named the starter, I could see Martell leaving. I'm just kind of, since you asked the question, I'm just kind of thinking the fact that Joe Burrow being mobile, maybe Tate Martell is thinking, okay, well, there really isn't as much of a role for me as there would have been if Dwayne Haskins had been named the starter. And conversely, if Dwayne Haskins is named the starter, that's where I see Joe Burrow leaving. Or if the coaches say going into the summer, nobody has the lead, I could see Joe Burrow leaving there. just because, kind of as the way that Gerd put it on a previous episode of Across the Field, it's almost as though, all right, well, we were even going into spring ball, we're even coming out. I mean, what do I have to do in order to win it? So it's going to be a difficult decision. I think Urban Meyer is trying to do the right. He emphasized he wants to do the right thing by Joe Burrow, but he has to do what is in the best interest of the Ohio State football program. So it's not going to be an easy decision, no matter how it comes out.
Now, do you think Jalen Hurts' dad, the way he came out today saying that, hey, my boy is, if he's not going to be the starter, he's going to be the biggest, and I don't understand why he said free agent in college football, but he's going to be looking to transfer. Do you think that's something that would, if Burrow doesn't get named the starter this week, behind closed doors and not even mentioned to the media, but if Burrow would be looking at that and saying, I got to try to figure out where I'm going to go and play at, but yet I have Hurts here trying to figure out a school. And you look in Wilton Spate went and chose UCLA. I mean, do you think that might have any role on his decision if he's going to stay or not?
I don't, because a couple things. Number one, no offense to Jalen Hurts, but if he does decide to transfer, he has to sit out a year. That's not something that, with the thing that Joe Burrow has going for him, same thing as Wilton Spate, is that Joe Burrow, he's going to be a graduate transfer. He's graduating from the Ohio State University next month. So he's eligible to play right away. Jalen Hurts is not. He's if he tries to play the transfer card, all right, good luck to you wherever you go, but you're not going to be playing for anyone this fall. Whereas Joe Burrow is going to be eligible to play right away wherever he goes. The other thing that I think a lot of people forget when it comes to Joe Burrow is that he's a coach's son. His father is an assistant football coach for Ohio University under Frank Solich. And I think maybe it's just what I don't know. I've never had a word of conversation with Joe Burrow, but I would believe that his father being in the profession would be of immense value to Joe Burrow in terms of the advice and counsel that he would give him, because as a football coach himself, there have been players that have transferred out of Ohio University, for whatever reason. So Joe Burrow's father has seen it as a coach. Now he's seeing it as a father. He's gonna probably be able to give his son probably the best advice and be able to speak directly and plainly to Urban Meyer about what is the best thing for Joe Burrow going forward.
Now, we don't really do rumors and stuff like that, but I know one of the constant rumors that you always see is Joe Burrow going to Nebraska. I'm in a school of thought saying that since Ohio State will be playing Nebraska this year, there's no way that they approve letting him pick Nebraska as part of his transfer choices. And I believe even as a graduate that a school can still sit there and say, hey, not in the league or not against teams that we're playing against that year. Am I right in this? Or, I mean, what's your school of thought on that?
I genuinely don't know, because the fact that the player has fulfilled his educational obligation to, that he's, kind of, I guess I'm just going to use Jalen Hurts' father's term, that a free agent. So maybe you're correct. Maybe you're mistaken. I genuinely don't know. I think I also have read the rumors, the fact that I referenced Joe Burrow's father being a football coach. Well, Joe Burrow's uncles played for Nebraska years ago. As I said, Joe Burrow's father is an assistant coach under Frank Solich, who used to be at Nebraska. So it wouldn't surprise me if Ohio State, if there was a mechanism in place to prohibit Joe Burrow from going on to Nebraska, from them doing that. I'm just going to throw another school out there that I'm not sure if you saw this because it was online yesterday or a few days ago. And this is not a school that Ohio State is scheduled to play this coming season, but it would make a ton of sense to me, and that would be Florida. Paul Feinbaum, or at least maybe a Paul Feinbaum fan, tweeted out about Joe Burrow being able to go to Florida, play for Dan Mullen, who, former Urban Meyer assistant, play in the SEC, play in an offense that is very, very similar to what Ohio State does, and probably be able to immediately start. So I would think that Florida would be definitely in the consideration if Joe Burrow does decide to transfer.
That's actually an interesting one, because that's one where when the coach sits there and says, we have to do what's right by the player and we have to do what's right by the school first, that if they do decide to go with Haskins, that he would probably call up Mullen or, and say, hey, you should take this kid.
Yeah. I mean, I could see a phone call to Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. The only downside to that is if Joe Burrow not only plays this year, but next, Ohio State plays Cincinnati in 2019. So that would make for an interesting dynamic. But I could see, I referenced Ohio U. Now, it really depends on what Joe Burrow wants to do, because as I keep going back to it, it's not going to be an easy decision for Urban Meyer. It's not going to be an easy decision for Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow, he grew up here in Ohio. He has his goal is to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. He mentioned in the post-spring game interview that, it would be very difficult for him to leave Ohio State. So I think he wants to stay, but I think what he needs to hear or what he needs to be told, that is going to have some significant influence on whatever his decision is. I think if he's told that it's even, I would be surprised if he stayed. If he was told that he's the starter, I think he does stay. I mean, we're never going to know. And I think the coaches are trying to, probably behind closed doors and discussions amongst themselves with Joe Burrow, with his family. I think those discussions are going to be, very sincere and upfront. And it ultimately, this Joe Burrow, it's more Joe Burrow's decision than the coaching decision. You know what I mean? Because the coaches, they have to do what's right for Ohio State football. Joe Burrow is the one who kind of is going to ultimately make the decision. Does he want to stay and be a part of Ohio State football, regardless of whether he's the starter or not? Or does starting take precedence over being a Buckeye? And we'll find it out, sometime very soon, I would believe.
Yeah, and if anybody knows and I'm wrong, feel free to, let me know. All right, one final thing before we wrap this up. Now, after watching the spring game and hearing that the offense has been not up to speed, the defense is ahead of the offense, which is usually the case, especially if you're going to be having, new offensive linemen, new quarterback and whatnot. Are you impressed by all the weapons that the offense has? And are you thinking of like Ranger things, like extremely happy thoughts of, remember in 2015, before the season started, one of the biggest things everybody was saying is that this offense is going to be scoring like the most points in college football history. And it's going to be the most explosive, the most electric, the most, the most exciting. Do you see that with this offense this year?
I see an offense with tremendous potential, but as you said, so much, potential is just another word for you haven't done anything yet. I mean, the running back position with Dobbins and Weber is, that's established. We talked about Paris Campbell earlier, KJ Hill, Terry McLaurin's back, Johnny Dixon's back. It seems as though the offensive weaponry is there to make the 2018 season dominant. But if that offensive line situation doesn't get solidified, really, as well as, what we've been talking about, the decision as to who's going to be the starter quarterback. That might be one of the things that we're lamenting a year from now is, like all that wasted talent, so on paper, it is very, very exciting looking ahead into the 2018 season.
And looking at my sheet here, I just realized, and I totally forgot, and I kind of had to steal this question from Tony and Acosta Field because I don't think we covered it in that show. I could be wrong, but the kickoff rule, you can fair catch it within the 25-yard line, and wherever you fair catch it from, it comes out to the 25. I mean, how will the kickoff rule impact Ohio State, in your opinion?
Well, DeMario McCall is going to have to adjust his goals because he had said prior to spring practice, I believe he had stated that he wanted to return at least 2 kickoffs for touchdowns this coming season. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I just think it's going to become more of the norm for teams to kick the ball off as high as they possibly can and have players run down, thus forcing you to take that fair catch. So as far as how that would impact Ohio State, I think, it's obviously is going to be a disappointment for players like DeMario McCall if that comes to pass, as I just said, but player safety is of paramount concern. For DeMario McCall, the fact that he's going to be playing that H-back position, being more used as a wide receiver threat on those crossing routes, plus the fact that that's not precluding him from possibly being a dangerous punt returner. I think Ohio State will be okay. As you said, I think they've got so many weapons at other places. Yeah, they might not return kickoffs for touchdowns, but I think Ohio State will be fine.
I think when Ohio State's kicking off, as long as they stop kicking the ball out of bounds.
Yeah, well, that's that's a frustration of mine. That's an Urban Meyer thing where he believes that by kicking it, at an angle, that all right, well, I'm going to pin them deep. Well, I kind of go back to the old Woody Hayes. I'm going to paraphrase what Coach Hayes used to say about the forward pass, about only 3 things can happen and 2 of them were bad. It's basically like, well, kicking at an angle, kicking off at an angle, only 3 things can happen and, 2 of them were bad. We saw that opening kickoff against Penn State with Saquon Barkley. The other one, Ohio State fans have grudgingly had to and frustratingly deal with is the ball going out of bounds. So I think just booming it out of the end zone, don't even give them a chance to return it. Yeah, they're gonna set up shop at the 25. Oh well.
Yeah, that I agree.
To me, I just think that's a stubbornness thing on Urban Meyer's part.
Yeah, and I mean it's a lot of people are saying, hey, this is wussifying or whatever, college football or just the NFL and whatnot, and it has to change. I mean, you look at players like Eric LeGrand, who was paralyzed off of a kickoff, I believe. Coaches like Greg Schiano, who were actually fighting for this, and it needs to happen. And yeah, the crowd's all hyped up, and especially at Ohio State, you got the, doing all the craziness and everything, and maybe they can stop yelling at, rip their effing faces off or heads off or whatever. But it's definitely a step in the right direction in order to make the game safer, in order to make the younger generations, where a lot of parents are worried about having their kids play, about having them feel better that their kids aren't going to be put in a situation. I mean, it was a matter of time, unfortunately, before somebody could have been, God forbidden, killed out on the field from a hit. I mean, we like to sit there and think it wouldn't happen, but it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, historically, when football began, kickoffs, we're talking at the beginning of the 20th century, there used to be...
And Michigan used to be good.
Exactly. But the idea of what was referred to as the flying wedge, the idea that guys would run down and, like as a mass, like fly through the air to, tackle people and And there were fatalities. I mean, there were literally fatalities. And Theodore Roosevelt, there was strong public. There was a strong public movement to ban football and abolish it. And thanks to Theodore Roosevelt pushing for and getting coaches to, okay, we're going to get rid of the flying wedge and putting certain rules in. Well, the kickoff became safer. But as you said, like the players have gotten bigger, they've gotten faster, they've gotten stronger. And you're seeing, players like Eric LeGrand, suffering, just devastating injuries. And the reality is, okay, yeah, I love watching, players return the opening kickoff or any kickoff for that matter for a touchdown. But if this is going to make the game safer, so be it. And I really don't see it as a big problem.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right. Was there anything that you wanted to discuss before we wrap this hot episode up?
No, I just think I'm going to be, I guess, eagerly every day on the ozone.net, that countdown series that Tony and Tom have, in terms of like what their 100 days towards college football. Because it's certainly going to be it's going to be difficult from now until I guess you could say the beginning of fall camp, in August, when college football becomes, more and more involved in terms of like the daily discussion. But it was a great spring. I think it's going to be a difficult decision for Urban Meyer, no matter how this all shakes out. But I think every Ohio State fan should be thankful that the number one concern of any college football program, not just Ohio State left the spring game without any significant injuries, because that's basically that's always like the biggest concern of any college football coach.
Definitely. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast on the Ozone Radio Network. I want to first thank you guys for listening. Second, please listen to the other shows that are on our network. You have the Buckeye Sloopcast with Jared and Kyle. You've got Sons of Schmidt. Hopefully they're going to be doing some more shows here pretty soon with Michael, and Brandon. Then you have, as Chip has been mentioning, Acosta Field with Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr's on there also, and myself. And then we have Art Wonderful show here. We're going to be doing some basketball show here pretty soon, talking about the schedule that just came out and the sanctions or whatever, and the signing that Ohio, commitment and stuff like that for Ohio State. So we're definitely going to be doing some stuff. So please, subscribe and listen to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud. We're on YouTube. Trying to get on Spotify. So, I mean, we're hopefully going to be wherever you can so you can enjoy us. We're going to be having shows every week during the summer, during the off season, talking about different Big Ten teams and having guests on and stuff like that. Some stuff working on behind the scenes. So, Chip, besides your work on the Ozone and at Athlon Sports, where can people find you?
On Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. Always love interacting with Ohio State fans, talking about college football. So feel free to hit me up there.
Yeah, you can hit me up on Twitter at Shannon, SHANNONCFB. You could, if you have questions for us, you can use the hashtag AskSilverBullets on Twitter, or you can email us at silverbulletspodcast@gmail.com. And I think that's going to be it for today. So again, thank you for listening, and go Bucks.
Go Bucks.